The great American bison roam the prairie once again. We've mentioned the attempt to bring the great American bison back to the plains in passing quite a few times on this channel, but we've never really fleshed out the subject in great detail. So, what exactly are we doing to return the bison to their natural habitat? This might just be one of the most optimistic and large-scale attempts to return a species to its natural habitat in human history. And unlike all of the other options and species that have been in discussion for decades now, this one is actually plausible. This isn't just wistful thinking and endless discussions in a conference room that lead to nowhere. The American buffalo has the right kind of support and financial backing to give it all of the tools and ecological restructure could need to make this a success. We're not just talking about future plans either, it's already happening. Let's get into it. Before we get to the methods and plans that are currently in motion, we need to discuss why bison are being reintroduced to the wild at all. It's not just about bringing back naturally occurring flora and fauna to a country. Most of Europe is free of wolves and bears, and there's no large-scale attempt to bring them back now, is there? And it's not about the enormous amount of meat, and the industry attached to it either. Though the meat is an attractive perk that comes with it, it's all about the colossal diversity in the plains that bison brought that we desperately need to get back. So let's rewind to the 1700s, just before the settlers started hunting the bison out en masse. Before that point, there were around 60 million of them roaming down in Mexico, all the way up to Canada and in the expanses between the north and the south. They were quite literally everywhere. Can you imagine just what an enormous impact 60 million of them, each weighing nearly a ton, had on the environment? These animals are so incredibly large that there were entire ecosystems that sprang up in the wake of their migration route. Taking the America's largest animal out of the ecosystem has upended the entire natural order of things, causing all sorts of mayhem, including the raging forest fires that engulf entire states at a time. We're not kidding about the fires, we wish we were, but it's true, and wildfires are just one of many huge changes that are affecting you just as much as the critters. So let's look into some of those changes real quick. Starting with wildfire prevention, a herd of a few hundred or a few thousand of bison would clear out any dead and dry grasses and brush for miles at a time. This does a lot of things. First, it diminishes any kindling a natural fire would need to spread, keeping fires at manageable levels that burn themselves out for lack of fuel. Secondly, it encourages biodiversity by reducing populations of edible plants that have become so overgrown that they're choking out other native species. And thirdly, and probably most important of all, a herd of a few thousand heads will leave tons upon tons of manure in their wake, covering the ground in enough fertilizer for a fresh new spurt of growth. Just the physical amount of manure that we no longer have in the wild has reduced plant productivity by 40% since the bison have left the plains. Naturally, all that manure is the perfect breeding ground for all sorts of bugs and grubs that lead to more biodiversity beneath the soil. Longtime watchers of this channel will know by now how much we stress the importance of diversity underground. It's not just the farmlands that have seen devastating insect decimations. The grasslands and forests have been hit hard too. The natural cycle of nutrients out there has slowed to a crawl, and the effects of this lack of fuel for the soil are starkly evident, as any rancher will tell you. There just isn't enough growing to feed a herd of cattle anymore. Now we get to the sheer weight of the animals in question. The amount of force that 1,500 pounds of body can drive down into the ground with their hooves is astronomical. Essentially, bison herds tilled the soil, worked in their manure, and aerated the ground as they moved. All of this leads to more oxygen, more nutrients, better water retention, and a great deal of seed dispersion. Without them, erosion, compaction, and genetically locked-off stretches of land are no longer a rare occurrence. It's happening all over the country, regardless of how much or how little rain an area gets. The ground is just too hard and too devoid of nutrients to allow much growth of anything at all. Predictably, all this loss of natural forage has impacted animal populations and the food chain overall, for the herbivores as well as the carnivores, birds, rodents, and insects. Yet the invasive flora and fauna are thriving, while the native populations suffer and dwindle. And lastly, bison wallows have disappeared. Bison like to roll and wallow in the ground to scratch the skin beneath their hides, get some hydration on their skin, and combat natural ticks and fleas. It also helps them shed that extra winter fur, regulates their temperature, kind of like hogs and elephants need to do too, and it's a way for them to leave their scents behind. Their bodies are so big that this wallowing creates mini craters in the ground, and if a herd is big enough, it can turn an entire field into a brand new small marshland. Wallows create new mini ecosystems that are excellent at holding on to water, where amphibians, reptiles, and insects thrive, adding a whole new facet of nutritional diversity to a previously barren land. And this is just half of the positive impact that the great American bison brought to the table. To say that we need them back is an understatement. Their absence has quite literally reduced production, both for livestock and for produce on farms, and it's causing millions of acres to stand dry, just waiting to catch fire. In 1884, there were less than 400 wild bison left in all of the Americas. And that's also the first time that any attempts made to protect the species were first implemented. From the get-go, the reasons that this is so difficult were glaringly obvious. And no, it wasn't humans hunting them anymore. The steep fines and prison time for poaching bison were enough to largely deter people from hunting them after 1890. It was the human settlements that caused the most issues. All of the bison's migration routes held the richest soil, so people settled where the best farmland was. If they can't travel, according to their natural instincts, well, a herd isn't going to grow in population. Now, if human settlements were a problem back then, when there were an estimated 63 million people living in the United States, can you imagine how complex this gets with a current population of almost 350 million people? Back then, bison farming was encouraged to rectify their critically endangered numbers, and this actually did the most good in terms of getting their populations up from a few hundred to a few thousand in no time. After all, if there's monetary incentive and food to be gotten from any animal, you can be sure that humans will jump at the chance to breed as many of them as possible. They're a hard animal to farm, and require much more heavy-duty infrastructure for water, feed, and fencing, not to mention a much more skilled hand to manage these enormously powerful animals. But it was, and still is, an effective strategy to build their numbers and to study them. That's the main reason that the state of Montana still has the highest populations of bison in the country, and it's also the best place to start reintroducing them to the wild in any significant numbers. This brings us to the current day. Now, the dream here isn't to get them to their previous multi-million heads across the country. That would be unrealistic. Besides, we have so many human settlements, with exorbitantly more people living in them to make it plausible for them to weave through the skyscrapers, roads, homes, highways, and whatnot. But what about just a few thousand? With the introduction of wildlife corridors, that's natural walkways for migrations to cut through cities, towns, and farmland without infringing on human-owned land, and some smart planning, smaller, well-managed herds can be sustained on the prairie again. As counterproductive as it sounds, a limited amount of annual hunting permits to keep herds' numbers under control is going to be one of the best ways to keep herds healthy and from getting so large that they eat through what's available on their mapped-out migration routes, forcing them to trickle out to the places where they, and the people living there, will be in danger. Keeping the spider web of natural, uninhabited soil free of new roads and housing, a fair amount of room can be set aside for nature to remain unblemished by civilization, leaving just enough pathways between each for herds to move from one to the next without hindrance. And we're not talking about just a few acres here either. The United States has more than 85 million acres of protected land in the country. 3.4 million acres have been mapped out for bison, and a wide variety of other migrating animals to move from one end of the country through to the other without interruption. It's kind of like playing the old-school video game Tetris. You just need to be smart about where those migration lines are going to run and how they're going to connect with one another. Then there's actively farming them. The practice never really stopped since 1890, it's just never been as popular as cattle farming has been. Will it overtake the beef industry anytime soon? Probably not, but there's more money to be made and a huge opportunity to increase genetic diversity the more they're actively farmed. There's no better time to get into the market than now. At this moment, while the ball is slowly picking up speed, there's still government funding and support to be gained from entering into bison rearing for agricultural purposes. State-funded projects to create breeding pockets that can exchange calves between them is a pivotal strategy to avoid genetic bottlenecks that can be just as devastating to their numbers as starvation would be. The United States isn't just interested in revitalizing previously decimated ecosystems, though that is at the top of their priority list. They're also interested in diversifying what's on our plates and building the economy. Right now, the first milestone is to get 3 permanent herds moving in the wild. 5,000 bison overall is enough to observe the ecological effects that they have on their old playgrounds, and it's just enough for us to feasibly keep an eye on their progress. If all goes well, that number can double in 5 years' time, and that's why we need more bison farmers. The more herds that are released and monitored, the more private breeding pockets are needed to keep them from inbreeding to catastrophic levels. The time for you to step into the fold is now. This is the window, and it's closing fast. 5 years from now, if all goes according to plan at least, the majority of the breeding pockets, major migration routes, and the genetic management will be in place. Not to mention those that got into the game early will have the most well-established herds and an early jump on a market that's still in its niche stages. Bison are just too big and too profitable to stay in the background for much longer. With the proper funding and support, there's no way they're not going to become a major food source in the country. And we can't be happier about it. A lot of us in the regenerative movement can see the damage done by chemical farming. We deal with the devastating effects of mass ecological die-off, erosion, depleted soil, and scant pollinator populations on our farms every single day. We dream of this kind of large-scale operation to bring the earth back to its glory days when crops could still grow and wildfires didn't destroy entire states in one go. But always the damage is so immense, and the attempts to rectify our destructive mistakes are just too insignificant to reverse our sins. Our vision for the future and the steps needed to take just seem too big, too expensive, and too enthusiastic to be realistic. But now finally, it's becoming a reality. With state funding and nationwide support, it's possible, people. The great American bison are coming back, and we couldn't have chosen a better, bigger, and more effective animal to throw our support behind. If you have the land and the heart for it, then get in on this historical, momentous revitalization of the country's landscapes now. Be a part of the solution. Get out there and save the planet, one Tatanka at a time. If you have any queries, or you just want to support the movement that's shaking up the soil beneath our feet, go have a look at AmericanPrairie.org. Just because you don't have the acreage to get in on the action, doesn't mean you can't be a part of the movement. Every click and every view counts. While you're geared up to save the planet, why not help support the channel that champions regenerative agriculture and ecosystem preservation alongside you? Leave a like, remember to subscribe, and don't forget to leave your thoughts down below. This channel wouldn't exist without your engagement. So to those who've been with us all this time, thank you. And to those just joining in on the fun, welcome to the movement. See you next week. Bye.